Hello Toy Collector fans, Universal Toy Collector here and welcome to the channel. And welcome to another episode of My Collecting Life, the weekly series where I get to speak with you, members of the toy collecting community, about your own personal collections, finding out what got you into collecting in the first place and what gives you that toy collecting buzz. Okie dokie then, so who is the guest on this week's episode? Well, you all know the drill by now. Sit yourselves down, make yourselves comfortable, and let's take a look at some of his collection in a musical montage. Okay then, wow, what an absolutely fantastic collection. And it is an absolute pleasure to welcome to the channel, Scott Crusher. Hello, sir, how are you?
I'm doing well, mate. Thank you very much for having me. Like I was saying to you before, I've been enjoying this series that you've been doing for a while now, so I'm excited to be part of it.
Thank you, very much appreciated. And it was quite a while back when I asked you. I think it was just after the 24-hour stream, wasn't it, that I got you in?
Yeah, the 24-hour live stream that you're probably still recovering from. That was quite the effort.
Yeah, absolutely. No. That was fantastic because that was the first time we actually spoke, wasn't it, during that live stream?
Yeah,
So
it was. It was. So it was great to meet you
awesome
then,
stuff.
and looking forward to having a bit more of an in-depth discussion today.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I say, really appreciate you taking the time for doing this. I've got 10 questions all about you and your collection. Run time roughly about an hour if we go over. Not too much of an issue. So if you're ready, Scott, we'll crack on with the first question.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Let's do it.
Awesome. Right. What toy lines were you into as a kid, and what are your memories of those toy lines?
So look, I'm going to try and keep this pretty tight because I can, as anyone that follows me on YouTube can know, I can certainly ramble. But quite a few toy lines as a kid, but certainly one or two that stand out above the others. So the first toy line that really, or the first action figure line, I should say, that really captured my attention was the Ninja Turtles line. The 1988 toy line, the 1987 animated series here in Australia, as is often the case, we got things a little bit late. So I think it was probably a little bit closer to 1990 by the time I was exposed to them. But as it related to kind of toys and action figures, that was the first thing that really captured my imagination and attention. Really, whatever was coming out Ninja Turtles wise, whether it was a cartoon, movies, toys, fast food tie-ins, whatever it was, if it had turtles related to it, then I was all over it. So that was really the first kind of love as it related to action figures. And there was a good couple of years where the turtles was really anything, was all I really wanted to play with or be watching.
So basically, that was the dominant toy line for you at that time.
Absolutely, yeah. So I was born in 1984. So yeah, from when I'm kind of like 5, 6, 7 years old, I'm all about the Ninja Turtles. That was the big focus. Um, the next big one that captured my attention for a sustained period of time after that was
Hmm.
actually wrestling figures. So I really
Okay.
enjoyed your chat with Phil from Treasures for Trigger the other
Yeah.
week. And I kind of share a lot of those similar sort of memories as Phil. Wrestling was really a big part of my childhood. That came
Yeah.
along for me in 1992, and that kind of kept my attention for a good few years as well, probably until about 1995 when I started to put action figures down. But yeah, so it was turtles for the early part of the childhood, and then wrestling figures, specifically the 4-inch scale figures from Hasbro in the early 90s were really
Okay.
the wrestling action figure line of my childhood. Now, with that said, I
Yeah.
definitely flirted with other lines in my childhood. I played for a good period of time with a really obscure line by Matchbox called Ring Raiders. I'm not sure if that's something you're
Okay.
familiar with.
The name rings a bell. The name rings a bell,
Yeah,
but I'm not 100% too sure.
I do know that they were in the UK because I've seen them. I've seen other collectors,
Yeah.
in the UK talk about them. So yeah, Ring Raiders was something that I played with. Crash Dummies by Tyco. It was another toy line
Okay.
in the
Yep.
early
Yep.
90s that I
I've
played
heard
with.
those.
So
Yep.
yeah, so Crash Dummies was fun because I mean they were literally designed to, in terms of vehicles and figures go in the vehicles, and they're designed to be smashed to bits. And as a
Yeah.
as a kid, my brother was really into playing with cars. I was more into playing with action figures, and that was a toy line that allowed us to kind of both it piqued both of our interest. And then
Mm.
outside of that, Stu, there was other toy lines that I played with, like in the 90s, I was really big into kind of like monsters and those sorts of things. And Monster in My
Okay.
Pocket was a bit of a pop culture kind of
Yeah.
bit of a kind of had its moment in the 90s, and I was really into Monster in My Pocket. But yeah, if we're talking action figure lines that held my interest for more than a year or two, then we're talking about Ninja Turtles, and then we're talking about wrestling.
Awesome. With the turtles, was it the cartoon that came first, or was it the toy line that came first on
Well,
Australia?
So they were look, they were pretty simultaneous, Stu. I couldn't tell you whether I saw the animated series before I got the toys, or whether I got the toys
Yeah.
before I watched the animated series. As far as kind of the memories of that time go, it was pretty much both came at once. And as far as your question about what my memories are, it's pretty vague because we're talking about being, when I'm 6 years old or 7 years old. But I
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
remember, whoever it was, probably my parents, but it could have been, it could have been my grandparents, um, giving me my first Ninja Turtles figure. It was Raphael, one of the four turtles, my favorite of the Ninja Turtles. And I'm not sure whether Raphael is my favorite of the Ninja Turtles because I got that figure first, or if I got that figure first because that was the one I asked for because he was my favorite. But in any case,
Yeah.
I remember being given the Raphael figure, and I remember my brother being given the Donatello figure. So between us, we had two of the four figures. But my brother was only a toddler at the time, and whether he had a lack of interest or whether I didn't give him a chance to have any interest because I took it off him pretty quickly. I had both of those turtles in my own collection, and from there I was kind of off and running. And when it came to my memories of acquiring toys as a kid, I didn't have the kind of parents that would buy you a toy for no reason, just for behaving yourself.
Yeah.
For me toys came at Christmas time and on my birthday. So
Yeah.
you know, for the 2 or 3 years that I was into Ninja Turtles, I probably acquired about 12 or 13 figures, maybe 14 figures. So I wasn't completing the line or anything like that because birthday and Christmas only came around twice a year. But
That's it.
um, but
Yeah.
it held my interest long enough to remember the first two live action films, to follow the animated series for a good couple of years, and to amass a nice little childhood collection of Ninja Turtles.
Awesome. It's really weird because I think by the time Turtles had come out, I was at an age where I was kind of like not so much grown out of toys, but I was so heavily focused into Star Wars, G.I. Joe. Then you had the other big lines from the 80s like Transformers and He-Man and stuff like that. So those were the ones that I was dominant, like
Yeah.
just like playing with and stuff like that. So I wasn't really too into the Turtles. I didn't actually get and watch much of the cartoon, the series and stuff like that. It's a toy line that I still haven't really gotten into. I know Georgie is saying that she likes the NECA versions of the
Yep.
Turtles. That some of those are quite cool. But yeah, it's really weird. And as far as wrestling's concerned, I just wasn't interested at all when I didn't really see that many wrestling figures in the shops in the UK. So
Yeah.
that's quite bizarre, really. I mean, like I said to Phil, the wrestling we had in the UK was like Giant Haystacks and Big Daddy, and that kind of thing didn't really hold my attention too much. Seeing like massive guys in like leotards and stuff like that, it wasn't really my sort of cup of tea. And and then I realized it's totally different compared to in the States, like the and all that sort of stuff, and it's just so different how they do it over there. So
I mean,
I never really got into.
Yeah, for sure, Stu. I think when it comes to Ninja Turtles, I think you probably had to be at the right age to really get involved in that. Like, I can totally imagine, like, if I was a few years older than I was at that time, and I'd been playing with GI Joe, or I'd be playing with Transformers or Star Wars, I could see how people might see the Ninja Turtles line as being a little bit too childish or a little bit too kind of young. But I just happened to be at the right age where, you know, mutated humanoid animals that knew karate. I mean, that was just the kind of thing that really spoke to me. So and then as far as wrestling goes, it's interesting because I do remember being exposed to certain like superhero properties as a kid. Like I remember seeing the campy Batman kind of TV series and film, and I remember watching the 1989 Batman film and really enjoying that. But for whatever reason, like I was never much of a superhero kid. Whereas to me, as odd as this might sound, like wrestling was almost like my real life superheroes and supervillains, because that's kind of the way it was for me. Like people might like, it's funny. I actually met up with the guys from Keep On Collecting and a few other collectors in our area today for some lunch. And I was having a chat with one of the guys there who didn't really get involved with wrestling when he was a kid because he knew that it wasn't real. And the way and of course, when I first got into wrestling when I was 8 years old, I thought it was real. But to think, oh, wrestling's not real. Well, I knew that Superman wasn't real, but that doesn't stop you from getting involved in that. Whereas to me, Hulk Hogan and Macho Man Randy Savage, they looked real. They were flesh and blood to me. So I was able to really get invested in the World Wrestling Federation as like this sphere of heroes and villains in real life. So, and look, just like Ninja Turtles in the early 90s, when I was into wrestling, it was everywhere. I mean, you go to the video store and there's wrestling tapes. You go to the newsagents, there's wrestling magazines. You go to the toy store, obviously wrestling figures were big business, video games, lunch boxes at department stores. I mean, wrestling was everywhere. And just like Turtles, I think I was really at the right age to get on board with it.
I mean, I know it's certainly a big thing. I mean, I know my little cousin, he was really into the Turtles, and every time I used to go around at a weekend and babysit for him, he'd want to watch the Turtles and stuff like that. So I kind of like, because he was a kid, I had to begrudgingly put the Turtles on. I was like,
sure.
No, it was cool. I mean, I can see the appeal of it. And I think it was only last year or the year before, I actually watched the first Turtles movie with Georgie. I've never seen any of the movies at all. But I will say, I'm quite looking forward to this new one that's going to be coming out. I think the animated version. So I'm quite looking forward to that. So
yeah, for sure. I mean, the live action movies like the one you're referring to from 1990, I mean, that was like my favorite thing to watch on TV as a kid, because again, like I was 6 or 7, 8 years old, when that was in the video store, and yeah, I was just at the right time to be able to really get invested in this quartet of mutant turtle, ninjas that fought crime and all the crazy mutant characters. I mean, it was just, it certainly spoke to me. And yeah, I mean, it was just one of those things that it was like a snowball of popular culture. You couldn't go, I remember there being like service stations here, or gas stations, like had little promotional toys, and when they were there, I'd want to go with my dad to get fuel in the car because I knew that there was a chance I might be able to get one of those 99-cent toys. I mean, it was just, Turtles was everywhere you looked at that time, and I was just in the right place at the right time to get swept up in that.
Awesome. Right, I've got a next question for you. This one, I don't know, might be a bit of a tough one. What was your favorite toy line as a kid and why? So out the two, the wrestling and the Turtles, what would you say would have been your favorite?
Look, it's it's a really difficult one to answer because for me there was not really any overlap. There was no point in my childhood where I was into both. It was like wrestling came along for
Okay.
me when I'd come out of Turtles and was looking for that next thing. So it's difficult to compare the two. I mean, if we're talking toy lines, oh man, that's tricky. I probably would say Turtles because
Yeah.
Turtles, the Ninja Turtles line, it had the vehicles, it had the play sets, it had a huge run of figures. All the figures came with different weapons, and as far as like a toy line goes, it was. I mean, I think the Turtles toys were probably more important to me
Yeah.
than the animated series. Like I loved watching that 30-minute animated series after school, but the toys I played with constantly. Whereas when it came to wrestling, I was more about watching it on TV, and it was just the toys
Okay.
were just kind of an extension of that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's
I
hard.
mean,
It's a difficult question.
it is, and well done for answering that. Um, there are so many different figures and variations of the turtles, aren't there?
Oh,
Within the toy lines, and then the wrestling
yeah,
as well. I mean, I didn't realize just how many different lines there are of wrestling figures and stuff like that. It's incredible, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why I've not got into the turtles is because there's so many of them, and I wouldn't know which ones to get. I mean, like I say, Georgie likes the NECA ones, and we're thinking about getting those. But then you've got the original ones from the 80s. Then you've got just so many of them. I mean, it's
yeah.
big old rabbit hole to fall into.
Oh, it really is. I mean, even the vintage Ninja Turtles line is a
Mm.
rabbit hole because the vintage line went for 10 years. It's like
Wow.
GI Joe. Like the
Yeah.
vintage line started in 1988 and finished in 1997. And by the time 1997 comes along, the figures that are being released bear no resemblance to where it started because it's evolved over time and it's kind of
Yeah.
appealing to a new generation at that point in time. Or maybe it wasn't appealing and that's why it ended up kind of fading. But yeah, it's a deep rabbit hole, even if you're looking at the vintage line. And then, as you say, there's so many incarnations of TMNT figures from a modern
Yeah.
standpoint because you've got NECA figures based on the live action film, based on the
Yeah.
animated series. You've got Super 7 figures based like on upscaled, updated versions of the
Yeah.
vintage figures. Then you've got figures based on the video game. It's a rabbit hole. I mean, one thing with me, Stu, is I don't really collect any modern toys. My
Yeah.
collection's pretty much focused around the vintage toy lines that are from the era of my childhood. But I'm kind of intimidated by the scope of some of these modern lines,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
especially modern lines that they're still releasing because it's like you have no idea how long that piece of string is. And if you're like me, once you start, like I want them all. So it's tricky.
It is difficult. I mean, especially now you've got like modern versions of the Transformers. You've got Motu Origins, and then you've got the Revelations figures. Then, of
Yeah,
course, you've got the Star Wars with the Vintage Collection and the Black Series, and they just seem to be pumping out figures left, right, and center with the new series that are coming out and stuff like that. So it is, I think no matter what it is you collect, it it can be time consuming, it can be expensive, and also it takes a massive chunk of space from your
definitely.
collection, doesn't it? Absolutely,
Yeah, it
absolutely.
really does. I mean, but there's something for everyone out there at the moment. Like,
Oh, crikey, yeah, yeah,
regardless of what franchise speaks to you, and whether you like the vintage original stuff or whether you like the updated modern stuff with all the extra articulation and accessories and far greater likenesses to the original appearance of the characters. I mean, regardless, I always look. I'm very much of the opinion that there's no right or wrong way to collect. And
absolutely, yeah,
watching your most recent episode of this show, you were chatting about that. Like, there's no right or wrong way to do it. Um,
yeah.
but I think you have to have some reins to it because you can certainly it can get out of control both
Oh,
in terms
yeah.
of
I mean, like I say, that's really down to personal preference, isn't it? I mean,
sure,
people collect how they want to collect and stuff like that. So
mm,
it's not for me to turn around to tell anybody how to collect or what to collect. It's just
for sure.
it's like it kind of it's a bit of a responsibility, isn't it? When it comes to collecting, because
Yeah,
you know your budget, you know your space, you know your limitations and stuff like that. So some people have got a better self control than others when it comes to that
yeah,
that kind of thing and stuff like that. I mean, I've still got loads of stuff in storage that I haven't even displayed yet. And
yeah,
until we eventually, if we when we do move and we get a bigger place, then hopefully then I'll be able to display everything that I've got. But even then, people have said to me, well, you're going to grow out of that room anyway, because
That's
you've
it.
got a bigger room. You're just carrying on collecting more. So is there a point you feel that with collecting, you stop collecting? When would you say enough is enough? I mean, that could be answered.
Oh,
That
well,
could be asked to any
so
collector, really.
yeah, I mean, like I literally don't want to stop. Like I never like so I collect, I don't know. I mean, when I started my collection, when I kind of made an active decision to start collecting, there was really three vintage toy lines on my radar.
Yeah.
Nowadays, there's probably closer to 15 vintage toy lines on my radar. But the thing that I like about collecting vintage toys is I know how long that piece of string is. I spoke to you about how
Yeah.
deep a rabbit hole the vintage Ninja Turtles line is. And for that reason, I'm only opening my mind up to collecting the first 5 waves, because
Okay.
the waves that came after that, I have no nostalgia attached to that. So,
Yeah.
they don't feel like the same turtles that I grew up with. So at least collecting vintage toys, I kind of know how long that piece of string is, and I kind of
Mm.
know what I'm getting myself into. But in saying that, like I don't want to reach the finish line. For me, it's very much about toy collecting, not toy owning. So as far as I'm
Yeah.
concerned, I hope that I complete my collection the day before I fall off the perch, and hopefully that's not for many, many years.
Well,
But
yeah,
it's
yeah. No,
almost like
touch wood there.
it's yeah, it's touch wood for sure. But it's almost like to me it's very much about the journey, and
Yeah.
I don't want to reach that finish line. Yeah, eBay is fantastic, and I could jump on and I could tick off so much if I kind of had the means and the inclination to. But for me, it's about
Yeah.
chipping away and playing the slow game and enjoying that journey rather than trying to race to the finish line.
Absolutely. It's definitely a marathon and not a sprint. So
One hundred
I
percent.
agree with that. Um,
Yeah.
when did you stop playing with your toys, and when did you become a collector?
Yeah. So it's interesting, Stu. Like I know that, speaking of the guys, that keep on collecting boys, like they kind of had toys in their life the whole way through. So they pretty much went from being from playing to collecting in a pretty, over a kind of a pretty short period of time. I'm
Yeah.
quite the opposite. Like I can tell you, I stopped playing with action figures in 1995. So
Okay.
that was my last year where I was really into wrestling. I was kind of 11 going on 12 years old, and I started high school in 1996. And to me, starting
Yeah.
high school, I just had this thing where I was like, you know what, I got to, it wasn't that I felt like I couldn't. It was more just that I didn't have that same desire. Now, with that said, in high school, I was still playing because I built remote control cars. I played with Warhammer. I played Warhammer and those sorts of
Okay.
tabletop games. So there was still
Yeah.
play in my life when I was in high school. But if we're talking about the stuff that I collect now, 1995 was kind of the bookend for that. As far as being a collector,
Mm.
not that long ago.
Okay.
Similarly to Phil from Treasures for Trigger, I've only been collecting for a few years, a couple more than
Wow.
him. I started collecting in like 2018, maybe early 2019. So yeah, I've been collecting for about 5 years.
Okay. And what was it that got you back into the collecting? What was it? You just woke up one day, saw something in the shop, and thought, "Oh yeah, I remember that." And then, I mean, so what got you back into collecting? It's
Well, a couple of things. So I found so I was moving home. Look, to peel the curtain back, I split up with my previous missus, and I was
okay.
moving home, and I was probably looking for something to, bring myself a little bit of joy and
Yeah.
kind of distract myself. And whilst I was packing up the old place and moving, I found a shoebox with my old childhood Ninja Turtle figures in it,
Oh wow.
and that was one of those things where it was just like, man, this is really cool. And I'm a little bit ashamed to say now that I jumped on eBay just to think, hey, do people want these? Are these? And I saw that there was a collector's market for it. And when I saw that, I didn't think, my thought wasn't about selling them. It was about, oh, maybe I
Yeah.
can find some of the accessories needed to complete them. And so at a very similar time to that, maybe even the same month, maybe even the same sort of month as I found those Turtles figures, I someone was selling a big lot of the other big toy line that was close to me as a kid, the Hasbro wrestling figures that I grew up with, a
Okay.
big lot
Yeah.
with the ring and all the championship belts. And I thought this might be a fun project, understanding that there is a collector's market for this stuff. It might be a fun project. It might help, it might be a bit of a distraction and something that I'll enjoy, a bit of a labor of
Yeah.
love to to buy this big lot of figures, clean them all up, match them up with their accessories, and list them and sell them. And if I can make a little bit of money, then great. It'll be just something that's kind of more fun to distract myself. So my first collecting purchase was actually purchased with the intent of reselling. And once I had those figures in hand, Stu, I couldn't part with them. Once I had them in my hand and I started cleaning them up, I'm like, you know what? These would look great on a shelf with my turtles. And that lot was that lot of Hasbro wrestling figures that I purchased, as well as the shoebox of childhood Ninja Turtles figures. That was the starting point for what you see for my collection. So,
awesome.
But with that said, Stu, it's funny because I was thinking about this. There were almost like warning signs that this was coming, because even a few years prior to that, I would go to the local comic store during my lunch break when I worked in an office in the city, and I'd drop into the comic store because I was reading a couple of different series, and I would see these modern like DC collectibles and think, you know what, these are really cool. Like, and they didn't pull me enough to buy them because there wasn't that nostalgic connection there. But they made me stop and take notice and think, wow, these are really cool articulated action figures with tons of detail. I started to kind of notice these things, and then when I found the childhood figures, and then when I got the old Hasbros to resell, and I just couldn't. That's kind of what got me going, and that was the end of 2018.
Oh, awesome! So again, not long, and you've done pretty well in that. Was it 5 years or so that you've been collecting? I mean, you've got quite a substantial collection there going on. So
it's interesting though. Like, probably like a lot of collectors, Stu. Like when I first started, any toy fair that was going on, I was there, and I was coming home with a lot of stuff, and I was jumping on eBay, and I was anything that I kind of vaguely remembered from my childhood, like, and it was such like this. It was almost like just I was so passionate that I wanted to like dip into a lot of stuff. So like I started buying a couple of Motu figures just because I wanted to see how they felt, even though that's not really something that I've gone further down. Because again, like I don't have a lot of childhood memories of Masters of the Universe, but like a lot of collectors, mate, when I first started, it was like all in. I was buying everything, and as I've kind of gone on, I've become more selective. And sure, I've gone down some little rabbit holes that I didn't when I started, but I'm not just buying anything I come across. I'm definitely being a bit more picky and choosy, and I've got more kind of more specific collecting goals, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Without trying to make it sound too much like a chore.
No. But that's awesome, because that leads us into the next question, should I say? What toy lines are you currently collecting, and do you have a main focus?
So look, I collect a lot of different toy lines, but they're not all as important to me as, like, some are definitely more important than others. So, vintage TMNT, the Ninja Turtles. So the WWF Hasbro figures that I had as a kid, you might be able to see that blue wrestling ring up there. So Kenner's Real Ghostbusters line, that I love that toy line.
Wowzers, I remember that.
That wasn't a toy line that I had as a kid, but the second Ghostbusters film was my first time at the cinema, and at the same time, a similar sort of timing to seeing the second Ghostbusters film, I had a cousin who had the figures, and so I've got memories of playing with those and thinking these are really cool, and that was something that I wanted represented in my collection. Aside from that, I collect the Ring Raiders, the Monster in My Pocket stuff, like the other figures I mentioned that I had when I was a kid. Crash Dummies by Tyco, Mighty Max. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Mighty Max. I collect those.
Yeah, I remember Mighty Max there.
Yeah, Toxic Crusaders, another line by Playmates, because it feels Toxic Crusaders to me is like a spiritual successor to the Ninja Turtles. It feels like the sculptors. It feels like the sculptors that designed those toys were working on Turtles, because the figures almost look at home displayed with the Ninja Turtles.
Yeah.
Aside from that, Stu, I mean, Playmates Dick Tracy line, just figures that went with movies that I remember enjoying as a kid. Kenner's Terminator 2. What else? Kenner's Jurassic Park.
Okay.
Those are the main ones. But yeah, I mean, I've got some Bucky O'Hare. I've got some Kenner, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. Just there's a lot of lines that I collect where they're not huge focuses, but if I see them in my travels, I'll pick them up. And the core lines that I collect, I've got a strong nostalgic connection with. But the other lines that I collect, they almost just help complete the picture of my collection room, where when I walk in here, I want to kind of feel like it's the early 90s, where you got a little sprinkling of everything.
Oh no, I get that. I get that. I mean, it's just like there's so many things that I would like to collect. I mean, like I said, I'll predominantly get like Star Wars. I mean, I need to finish off my vintage collection. I've still got a handful of figures to get from the last 17, but prices have gone up quite a bit on those. So, I'm holding off. Well, holding off. I mean, they're probably only going to get more expensive, but I wish I'd have got those first before I started collecting everything else. But yeah, I mean, like I say, I was into sort of like Motu, G.I. Joe as a kid. I mean, I've got a thing for DC, like Batman, Harley Quinn, Joker. McFarlane toys, I think they're doing a fantastic job, and that is now up there with probably one of my favorite toy lines. So
yeah,
there's all sorts of like bits and bobs. I mean, Transformers, I've got a few re-release of the G1 figures, but yeah, it's again, there's just so many different rabbit holes to fall down and stuff like that, and it's hard.
But it is, Stu, it is really nice to have diversity in your collection, because if I only collected the vintage Ninja Turtles line, or if I only collected the Hasbro WWF line that I grew up with, I'm far enough into collecting those that I don't find figures every week or every month. Like it's a bit of a search to find stuff, especially here in Australia, because I don't tend to shop on eBay in the US a lot, just because of how expensive postage is. So if I'm looking locally, I'm not finding this stuff every day. So it's nice to have a diverse collection, because while you're waiting for those last 17 Star Wars, or the harder to find Ninja Turtles or wrestling figures, there's other things that I can pick up in the meantime to kind of keep the fun going.
Absolutely. And I mean, there's so many other lines as well. I mean, I've seen people collecting masks. I mean, I love the mask vehicles, and I remember like having a couple as a kid, and a friend of mine, he was the main guy that I used to go around at a weekend. He was an only child, so he had practically every toy line that you could possibly want back in the 80s. He was like Star Wars, G.I. Joe, Transformers, Motu, Mask. But then I've seen things like Centurions that I remember as a kid, but I never was into the figures. Then you got things like Brave Star. Now, I've heard of Brave Star. I know what Brave Star is, but I never used to watch the cartoon. Then you've got Thundercats. I mean, that's another big line that I remember watching the cartoon, but I was never really into the action figures, So, and then of course now they've just released the Dungeons and Dragons figures. I mean, wow, they look fantastic. I'm not too keen on the way they've packaged them, and I know that there's a lot of quality issues with the figures breaking and stuff like that. But I mean, NECA, they've done that War Duke, and I remember him as a 3 3/4 inch figure as a kid, and the NECA version looks absolutely incredible, and it's I wouldn't mind getting that, but do I need it? No, I've got other things that I probably should be. Well, I have like bills and stuff like that, but there's other bits in my collection that probably take a priority. Do you find that? I guess you prioritize as well, yeah.
Oh, of course. I mean, like I'm a very patient collector, Stu. Like, I'll wait for things to come along at the right price. There'll be situations where I'll be angry at myself for not pulling the trigger on something that comes up. Like, so for instance, I set a little bit of a collection goal for myself this year, in terms of like, these are 5 things that I want to try and pick up this year that are very much core to my collection. And and we're kind of halfway through the year, and I'm about halfway through ticking off that list.
Okay.
But so one of the items on that list, it's a Ninja Turtles large mutant figure, and it's kind of like, the best way I would describe it's called Killer Bee. It's like this big mutated bee that the Ninja Turtles villains ride on, and it's almost like Ninja Turtles' answer to Battle Cat or Panther in Motu. It's like these large beasts. And I put this on my list, on my kind of wish list for 2023. And I want to say maybe like March or April, it popped up on Facebook Marketplace, and it was at a reasonable price. And I thought about it for a minute, and I was like, oh no, I didn't really want to spend $500 on a Sunday while I'm trying to watch what I spend. And I didn't purchase it. And then
Oh,
I was really, and then I was really, and then and eventually when I decided to purchase it, it had already been sold, and I was really angry at myself. It's like I knew I wanted this. It was a reasonable price, but wouldn't you know it, 2 or 3 months later, I was at a toy fair here in my, within an hour of where I live, and I saw it there, and I managed to get it for a comparable
oh,
price. So
cool. Okay.
the way I look at it, like I'm not the kind of person that I'm not trying to collect like rare, I'm not trying to collect like super rare variants, like European
Yeah.
exclusive. Like I'm just trying
Yeah.
to complete the basic figures of the toy lines that I like to collect, and eventually it'll all come back around again. So, and maybe I'll have to
Mm.
pay a little bit more, but I just try and be patient with the collecting, Stu. But when I see something at the right price, yeah, but
Oh, you
I'm
got to
trying
do
to.
it.
You got to do it. You got to do it.
Absolutely. And this is a good thing about this series and chatting to people like yourself and all the others. Everyone is so different. They
Sure.
have different ways of collecting. They have different priorities and stuff like that. And I just find it really interesting. What floats one person's boat doesn't necessarily float another person's, but we can all
Exactly.
appreciate the different ways of collecting and people's collecting styles. I just absolutely
Yeah,
awesome.
without
Do
a doubt.
you have a sentimental or prized piece in your collection?
I do. So my sentimental piece. So I spoke to you. So I mentioned when I answered your first question, Stu. I told you how my first Ninja Turtles figure was the Raphael. My brother got the
Yeah,
Donatello, but I kind of
yeah.
just claimed them both for myself. I've still got that Raphael. It was in that shoebox I was telling you about.
Awesome. Look at that.
This was the first action figure that I remember getting as a kid, and
Yeah.
this was in that shoebox of action figures that I found when I was moving house that got me going. So this figure essentially started my childhood collection, and it also started my adult collection. So
Wow.
look, it's by no means a rare figure. Uh, but those two weapons, like they're original.
Yeah.
Somehow I held on to them. So yeah, this would be the sentimental piece. And then if we're
That is
talking about
awesome. I'm liking that.
yeah, so I'm really, I mean, it's again, like I said, mate, it's not a rare or expensive figure, but the fact that that was
Yeah.
my childhood version is really special. And as
Yeah.
far as a prized piece goes, I got a lot of
I,
stuff in
when I say prize piece, I don't mean like most expensive piece.
no. Yeah. I got a lot, I got a lot of stuff in my collection that I really love. But if I had to
Yeah.
just say what's one prized piece, it would
Hmm.
be the Ninja Turtles Technodrome. So I'm not sure
Okay.
if you're familiar with the toy, or if I sent you some pics, but it's essentially
Yeah.
that big. It's basically it's the mobile playset of the villains in Ninja Turtles. It's basically it's kind of in the vintage Turtles line. It was the
Yeah.
biggest ticket item. And I've got it. I'm not sure if you
Yeah.
can
I
see
can
that.
see it at the back. I can see it at the back. Yeah. I know
Yeah,
what you
that
mean.
big
Yeah.
grey sphere with the eyeball on
That's it.
top.
Yep.
Now, the reason that I say that's my prized piece would be because if my 8-year-old self or 7-year-old self walked into this room, that's what they like. That my the childhood version of myself would be like, "Wow, this is incredible! You've got all this stuff." But that was the thing that I wouldn't have even put on my Christmas list to Santa because I would have thought it was unattainable. You know what I mean? So,
Okay.
um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, to have the kind of the big play set from the vintage Ninja Turtles line, it's 100% complete. That's the prize piece because I know that that's what my childhood version would get the biggest kick out of seeing.
Oh, that is awesome. That is so
Yeah.
awesome. I'm loving that. I'm loving that. Do you have a grail piece? Is there something that you've seen, then you think, yeah, I wouldn't mind that, and you'd say to yourself, well, it's a pretty penny, but I want that in my collection.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to give you just one shoe because I've there's so many
Mm,
it's really tricky. Like there's so what I would say to you is the one the rather than so when I set this list for myself at the start of this year where I picked out
yeah,
5 things that I'd really like to get this year, I try not to like focus on getting like the really big ticket expensive holy grails because
yeah,
when it comes to the vintage Turtles line, for instance, like there's action figures, there's loose action figures that you can spend $2,000 on, the late
oh
wave
wow,
figures that are really rare that you can spend 2 grand for a loose figure on it. And I'm never going to do that. I'm not that kind of
yeah,
person. I think about what else I could get for that money in the
oh
context of my
absolutely, yeah,
collection or of life in general. So I try to when I think about like my wish list of the things I'm trying to hunt down, I try to keep it realistic. And for that reason, what I would tell you is I mentioned to you the Killer Bee, the big mutant that I thought I missed out on, but then I
Yeah.
found it at the toy fair. So the kind of the opposite of that, if the Killer Bee is the Panther for Motu, the Battle Cat is another big mutant in the Ninja Turtles line called Needlenose, and that's the one that's really
Okay.
top of my list now. So that's what I would tell you. Of course, there's a lot of rare Ninja Turtles figures like Scratch. The cat is the one that a lot of Turtles collectors are chasing. Hotspot is another one. But again, unless I happen to find these figures in a rummage tub at a toy fair, and whoever's selling them doesn't know what they are, and I just happen to come across them, like, unless it's that sort of situation, I can't see myself ever spending $1,000 or more on one action figure. So I prefer to kind of keep it attainable to the things that I can realistically go out there and find at a toy fair and justify buying.
Yeah. On that subject, if you went to like one of these boot fairs or like a toy fair and someone was selling something that you've just mentioned on the cheap and they didn't know what it was, or they had no idea what it is, would you feel inclined to say something to them, or would you like going to snap that up straight away, no questions asked, just going to get it?
To be honest, I like, if in my heart of hearts, I probably would just grab it. Like if I saw like a rare Ninja Turtles figure that was, let's say, I mean, look, if I see $100 figure in a $5 tub, I'm not saying anything. I'm just going to pick it up. If I saw a $2,000 figure, I can't, like, I'd like to think that I would say, do you realize what you got here? But it's just, I don't know that I would. I mean, like, we're all out here trying to get bargains. The last thing I'm trying to do is dupe anyone, but
no.
It's one of those things that I think it would be really difficult not to just light up with excitement and grab it. You know what I mean? And what I would, what I would probably want to do, Stu, to like overcompensate for a little bit of that, like, is whatever else they had on their table, I'd be trying to buy as much from them as I could. You know what I mean? To try and repay a little bit of that. What about you?
I mean, me. Well, listen, I'd be in there and I'll be like, I'd get it. Yeah, I'll be honest, I would get it.
Yeah.
But saying that, I feel now, with the way things are and collectors and people know that they're collectors out there want to buy it, they should do their homework. They should have a look. I mean, you've got the internet. You should look online and search this toy up and see its value. So, if I'm selling something, then I would look at the prices on eBay or wherever and just say, okay, well, that's the going price, or that's roughly around the price. I either mark it down as a little bit less, so then someone would buy my items, but yeah, people need to do their homework. They need to, with the way things are with the toy collectors and stuff like that, as in so many people are into it now. Yeah, definitely check, see what you've got and see what it's worth, and then decide whether you want to sell it for £5 or whether you want to sell it for loads of money. Do you know what I mean?
100%. Like, it's a really interesting question though. Like if you saw like a really expensive, if you saw like a last 17 figure in like a rummage, like, if you just saw one of those really desirable figures in a rummage tub at a toy fair, and you just managed to get to it first, would you feel inclined to say something? I agree with you. I think the onus is on the seller to do their research and know what they're selling.
Absolutely.
I definitely wouldn't pick it up and say, "Oh, you've got 5 on it. Would you take 2?" I would just, you just take it. But it's an interesting question. But I think you're probably lying to yourself if you say you're not going to just grab it and it's going to make your day. Because
absolutely,
that's why. I mean, we don't have boot sales here, car boots here, unfortunately.
Okay.
They look fantastic, but we have toy fairs here and we have flea markets here, and that's why I traipsed around a flea market last Saturday, was in the hope of finding some bargains, of finding something that you don't see every day at a nice price. I mean, that's why you do it. So I think in all likelihood, anyone watching this probably would grab it and be happy, and it would make their day.
It's funny, isn't it? Because you saying that, like you go to these like toy fairs and stuff like that. So when you go to a toy fair, you automatically assume people know what they've got, so they'll mark it up at a certain price, and you're spending about 5 or 10 minutes trying to knock that price down so you can get the best bargain you possibly can, isn't it? But then when you see something like that, you don't say anything. You just I mean, we're all in the same boat. We'd all do that. Do you know what I mean?
With that said, Stu, like, I imagine a slightly different situation at a toy fair. I'm grabbing that item. If I went to if I went to a garage sale, and let's say
Yeah.
and this is not a very nice thought, but let's just say, someone had inherited a collection from someone who'd passed away, and they had no idea what it was worth, and they were just selling it
Yeah.
for a penny. In that case, I probably would be more inclined to be like, hey, listen, you've got some really desirable stuff here. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, that's a
Yeah.
situation where I think I'd be more compelled to really to speak up and say something. Whereas at a toy fair, absolutely the onus is on the seller to know what they're selling.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Going forward, if you could only collect one toy line out of all the toy lines that you collect, what would it be and why?
Yeah, so because I've watched quite a few of these episodes, Stu, I've had a chance to think about that one, and it's a tricky question because to me,
Yeah.
like I by no means have the best and most comprehensive collection of any one line. But to me, what makes my collection special is that variety. So if you strip that
Yeah.
away and say I've only got one, that makes collecting less fun to me. But if we put that to one side, the
Yeah.
correct answer in my case is Ninja Turtles, because it ticks all the boxes. I've got the nostalgic connection. It's a great vintage toy line. It's a deep line, so it would keep me busy for many, many years, even if that's all that I was
Yeah.
collecting. And it's got a lot of things that the wrestling action figure line that I grew up with doesn't have, because it's got vehicles, it's got play sets, it's got larger mutant, beasts. It's got all those things to keep me occupied. Whereas if I was only collecting wrestling, which would be the other contender, you've just got the wrestlers and the ring, and that's about it. So yeah,
It's
turtles all the
interesting.
way.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Star Wars for me. So, yeah.
Yeah.
But like you say,
would imagine.
I do like the variety though, and it's funny because I've had conversations with people and they've turned around and said, "I don't know how you can collect so many different lines."
Yeah.
But if you think about it, all their focus and money is going on to the one toy line.
Yeah.
Whereas if I'm collecting different toy lines, I've got to be a bit more varied about what I get. I can't, so I will get that same amount of money and then just spread it out over a different
Sure.
set of toy lines. Do you know what I mean? So it's not like we're spending any more money or anything like that. I mean,
No.
you have phases where you go through, like, say, buying loads of Star Wars, then maybe a couple of weeks later or a month later, it's okay, I want to get some more like classified G.I. Joes or more Motu. So it's, yeah, I mean, if I was disciplined enough, then I would definitely only collect one toy line. I'm not.
Yeah.
And that's just how it is. So that's all good. I'm happy
I
with that.
think to me, collecting a lot of different toy lines actually makes collecting more sustainable. Firstly, because if I was only collecting one toy line, that's where all the money was going into. Well, then I
Yeah.
would finish my collection quicker. But secondly, like, it keeps it interesting because, as you say, like you go through phases where you really get engaged in something, and you go down that for a little bit, and then something else grabs your interest. And to me, it I've never lost my interest in collecting has never waned at all. There's never
Yeah.
been a period of a week even where I haven't been in the collection room, whether it was making a video or whether it was just hanging out. Or so yeah, I think to me, collecting different toy lines actually, in my instance, it makes it sustainable because there's no burnout, because there's different things to focus on.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I know you're into vintage, and that's predominantly how I started. I mean, before 2020, it was just vintage Star Wars that I was collecting, whether it be the vehicles or the figures. But then obviously 2020 come along, everybody got bored, jumped onto YouTube
Yeah.
watching figure reviews, and that's when I found out all these different toy lines. But now it's only just recently that I've started getting back into collecting vintage stuff, whether it be the vintage O-Ring G.I. Joes, which I'm now amassing quite a nice little collection, or whether it's the original Motu figures back from the 80s and stuff like that. And I think, to me, to have some of that vintage in your collection, I couldn't imagine my collection without my vintage Star Wars, Motu, or G.I. Joe now. I mean, I do love the modern day sculpts and stuff like that, and the figures and the articulation of the modern figures. But for me, there's you get a massive nostalgia buzz for when you look at the vintage stuff, and it's, I don't know, there's just a charm about it that I like.
I couldn't agree with you more. Like, I appreciate the heck out of a lot of the modern stuff that's available
Yeah.
now. I sympathize with the quality issues that from time to time I hear yourself and other people in the community talk about. But when I go to toy fairs, I will look at the modern stuff. In the franchises that speak to me. But to me, there is something very pure about collecting something that was a toy. I mean, sure, like this was designed by a corporation to separate parents from their money. I mean, this was a corporate thing, just like modern action figures are now. But this was designed for a kid to play with. This was designed for a kid to allow their imagination to run wild.
Yeah.
When you see when I see paint imperfections, that's just like that's a good time that I had back in the day, whether it was myself or any other kid. So yeah, I mean, to me, there's like a purity of vintage toys. And of course, like there's elements of it that are far from pure. But when it comes to me, like I just love the, just the kind of innocence associated with collecting vintage toys, because they are toys. They were designed for kids to play with. They brought kids a ton of joy. So that's just an element of it that kind of speaks to me. That and look, I've only been collecting for 5 years, so maybe we have this chat in 5 years, another 5 years, and the collection looks different, and I leave myself permission to change my mind. Like if one day I want to do something different collecting wise, I'll do something different. But at least at this point in time, I haven't. I can appreciate the modern stuff, but nothing's really hooked me enough to go and part with my money on them. And look, space is limited. So I live in an apartment. This is like the study area. This is the study of my apartment. So it's a small room.
Yeah.
And I try not to let I'm in an apartment, so I try not to let the collection go too far out of this room.
Spill out. Yeah. What would you say then, if for a toy line to become vintage, how long would you say that would take? I mean, like today's modern toys. Yeah. So how long in the future would you say, right, look back and go, yeah, they're vintage?
Oh, mate, I find that a really interesting question. We've myself and a couple of other, I think maybe Luke Reynolds and the Keep On Collecting boys, like that's a topic that we've spoken about in live streams previously. And again, like I don't think there's any right or wrong answer there. Like Andrew from Keep On Collecting suggested that, look, as soon as something is no longer available at retail, as soon as it's secondary market only, I suppose in a way it's vintage. I've always heard that, like 20 years was the point at which something became vintage. But for me, I can't get my head around something that came out in the 2000s when I was in my 20s, like, or when I was in my, my early 20s or whatever. Like to me, that doesn't seem vintage to me. If anything, something had to be from the era of my childhood to be vintage. But again, like I don't think there's any right or wrong answer there. What about you? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I would say anything over 30 years.
30 years?
30, give it 30 years, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can get on board.
That's just my opinion, or my view.
I can get on board with that. So my collection, like, so I pretty much have like a cutoff of like 1995 for my collection, because I've got a couple of things that came after that, but because 1995 was when I stopped playing with action figures, that tends to be, the stuff that appeals to me is the stuff that was out when I was playing with action figures. So 1995 is my cutoff, and like I definitely consider stuff from 94, 95 as vintage, but once it gets a few years beyond that, I struggle to see it as vintage. But again, like if I was 10 years younger, then I'd probably feel differently about it. If I was someone who was in my mid-20s or late 20s starting to collect now, then I'd probably think that Pokemon from the early 2000s is vintage,
Well, crikey, yeah. I mean that's still going strong, isn't it? But I get that.
It's an interesting question, though. It's another interesting question, mate.
But it's I mean, like you say, there's no right or wrong answer to that, is there? Because everybody's going to be different with their views and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
What made you decide to start a YouTube channel, and who were your influences?
So, what made me decide to have so I started my channel in March of 2020. So, like, straight up, like, wow. I remember it was the Easter weekend here in Australia. Lockdown had just started. Like we were in our first taste of lockdown, and there was no sense of like how long this would go for. And so for me to start it that early, in the pandemic, I'd obviously been thinking about it prior. It was just the prime opportunity to. But so the pandemic gave me the time and the motivation to actually do it. But really, what made me start, what made me think about it prior to then was the fact that none of my existing social circle was into this stuff. Like
Yeah.
I would go to toy fairs by myself. I would speak to nobody except the vendors I was buying from and maybe exchange a few polite words with people. And then I'd go there by myself. I'd hang around by myself, and I'd leave by myself. Occasionally, I wrote my brother into coming along, but it was the fact that I had all this joy for this stuff, and you know, I'd come home from a toy fair with something, and there'd be no one to share that kind of excitement. So to
Yeah.
me, I like the idea of having a platform to be able to just share that with, even if it was three people. And as a secondary aspect to that, I thought, you know what, if I can connect with through this with some local collectors in my area, then that would be really cool as well. And I've been able to do that, with the Keep On Collecting boys and the other guys that I was out and about with today. So it was really like wanting to have a platform to be able to speak about this stuff with, and then as an extension to that, to be able to establish some connections and a community, kind of connect myself into a community to be able to
Yeah.
enjoy this together. Because collecting is a solo pursuit, but I think it's absolutely best done as part of a broader group, or as part of
Oh,
a community.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
As far as influencers, it's interesting because I did watch a lot of the retro blasting and the Pixel Dan, but it was those channels that actually made me think there's no way I can do this. The people that actually influenced me to just get off my ass and do it were some really small channels. A channel called the New 80s Revolution, a guy I've come
Yep.
to know, Jason, who basically talks all things 80s, not just toys, but all the stuff about the 80s that made the decade so special. And he's just a dude that sits in his basement, talks to a camera, no editing, and keeps it real simple. And there's another guy on
Awesome.
YouTube who's become a friend called Stephen Brown, and he just did movie reviews and stuff like that. And
Okay. Yeah.
it was actually, so I followed the big toy YouTubers, but it was actually seeing other people who didn't edit, who didn't invest in production, and who just kind of kept it pretty real, that made me
Yeah.
think, well, you know what, maybe I can do that, because they don't have the fancy editing skills and stuff like that. So but look, interestingly enough, once I started, I actually kind of wanted. I was thinking about, like, how can I improve my production a little bit? How can I
Yeah.
make this tighter? And yeah, but so it's interesting. I was influenced a little bit by the bigger channels, but it was more so like the average Joes that were out there just just having fun with YouTube, that made me think, well, yeah, I can definitely do this.
No, it's cool. I mean, again, in the same boat as you, I wanted to do it in 2020, but
Yeah,
I really didn't have. I know people use phones and stuff like that, but I wasn't comfortable using the phone. The laptop we had, it wasn't great. It was old, and it was like packing up. So we needed a new laptop, and we got one for Christmas and stuff like that. So it just went from there. But I've said the story so many times. I was off social media completely, and it was Scuba Pete that brought me back into the social media side of things by joining their Instagram chat. So I did that. And he said, you don't have to post anything, just come on and say hello. And then people were like posting pictures of their collections. And I thought, oh God, and enticing me in. So it's kind of gone from there. But yeah, I mean, the community is absolutely fantastic. And to have a collection and to share that with people and to find out about
yeah,
other people's collections and stuff like that. And just, I'm not a reviewer. I wouldn't do reviews. I do like overviews. I mean, there's so many
yeah,
people out there that are far better at doing a toy figure review than I ever would be. So I know my strengths and weaknesses and stuff like that. And
yeah.
so, but yeah, I mean, yeah, it's just a fantastic community to be part of for sure. Definitely.
Definitely, definitely. But I think, like, going back to me sticking with vintage and kind of like, I think the fact that, like, I follow a lot of other people on YouTube and on social media, and
Yeah.
I get to kind of like vicariously appreciate some of this cool modern stuff through other people, it
Yeah.
means that I don't feel as compelled. Like, I got to check it out for myself. If it's not speaking to me, in terms of making me part with that money, then the cool thing is that I can really appreciate that stuff through other people. And it's interesting. Like, I collect so many different vintage lines now,
Yeah.
and just like Luke Reynolds has spoken about, a lot of that comes from the influence of other people, because other people shine a light on a toy line that I'd
Yeah.
completely forgotten, and I'm like, wow, like, I
Absolutely.
need some of this stuff. So
Yeah.
I mean, it's really special, man. Like, it's cool to have like a creative outlet and have an
Mm,
outlet to be able to share the passion. But it's just as cool, if not cooler, to have that community to. And like just
definitely.
like I said to you, mate, today I hit the road and I went to see Matt from Keep On Collecting, and Andrew was there, and a few other people were there, and we had some lunch, and we went back and hung
Awesome.
out for a little bit in Matt's toy room and just talked toys, and it was just the best. Man. So
Yeah,
yeah,
it's so cool.
it's wicked, man. I love it.
Definitely. I mean, it was the Foosh that opened my eyes to all these different toy lines because he does his like weekly Foosh weekly and whatever, where everything that news coming out, and I was just blown away by the amount of stuff that was actually there. You know, like Black
Yeah,
Series, you got NECA, then you've got like Marvel Legends, all that sort of stuff. But it's people like Luke Reynolds with Mask. I mean, now I'm very tempted to dive into Mask.
for
You know, you've
sure.
got Chris Miwa, you've got other people like Tim from Bosk's Bounty and Nick from Only One Kenobi. I mean, like I say, they're into Star Wars and the vintage collection, and the collections
Yeah.
they've got are fantastic. And I kind of feel inspired and well, basically easily led into
Yeah.
getting things. So when I first started, I was like, okay, I must have this, I must have that, I must have this. Over the year, I've learned to rein it back a little bit because I mean, at
Sure.
first I was like straight in and like, I've got to get this, I've got to get that, and and I like that, and Georgie, bless her, she was. I remember one day saying, if I see it, then get it because I might not see it again. So I don't need
Yeah.
any invitation there. So I'm like straight in
Yeah,
there.
yeah. Well, it's
But yeah,
awesome that you got
definitely.
that support. That
Yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah.
not playing devil's advocate. It's saying, you know what, like if you want it, if it's going to make you happy, go ahead and grab it.
I've got to be sensible at the same time, though.
True, of
That's the
course you
thing.
do.
That's the
Of
thing.
course you do. So when
when
it
it
comes
comes,
to the,
oh sorry,
sorry, mate,
no,
if
go
I
on.
could just ask,
No, go on. No, go on.
like when it comes to the modern stuff that you collect, whether
Hmm.
it's Star Wars, whether it's classifieds, whatever the case may be. So, if you're collecting a modern line, are you trying to complete each wave of that line, or do you have the restraint to be able to say, I'm just going to get these figures, these are the characters that speak to me, this is
Yeah.
the vision of a display, and be able to be a bit selective?
Yeah, I do now. When I started, it was with certainly with the classified because they were numbered. It was like, okay, I need to get these, all of these
Yeah,
and stuff like that. And it was everything that was coming out from the vintage collection and everything that was coming out from the Black Series. And then it took me a while to think, hang on a minute, no, I can't do this. And it was when the pre-orders were happening. So they would say it would be about 3 or 4 months. So you budget that, but then everything sort of like came in at the same time. And I was like, go another budget. And I was like, oh, I can't do this anymore. So I cancelled all the pre-orders apart from the Return of the Jedi 40th anniversary waves and stuff like that. So if I see something in store or online for a decent price, then I'll get it. I mean, I've cancelled loads and loads of pre-orders. I don't really pre-order too much now. If it's in store and they've got it online there and then I'm okay, yeah, I'll get that. But
gotcha.
but yeah, now I mean, it's like with the Revelations figures. I'm not going to collect every single one of those Revelations figures. I'm just going to get the main characters that I remember and liked as a kid, and they will be my modern day representation of those figures.
Sure.
While then again, I've got but with the vintage collection, I've got my original Kenner figures there and childhood ones there. But what I want to do is get the 96 that were from the vintage collection and have a similar setup. So I want my vintage collection figures to mirror my original Kenner figures and how I've got them set up. So that's what I'll be doing. That's what I'll be doing there.
Same characters
yeah, but just the modern day version. If they don't do it in the vintage collection, then it'll be the best of the modern day versions to put in that spot for that figure. I've got two questions left for you. So let's crack on. What gives you that toy collecting buzz?
Oh man, the toy collecting buzz comes in a lot of ways for me. At its core, the thrill of the hunt. The thrill of the hunt. So, and for me, I like. It's not just about trying to find the things that I want. It's also trying to find them at a reasonable price. That a lot of the satisfaction of finding something that I've been searching for is feeling like I've got the right deal for it. And I'm not trying to steal anything from anyone, but I don't want to overpay in my haste, because that to me strips a little bit of the joy out of it. So it's the thrill of the hunt. And it's interesting. When I first started collecting, like eBay was like my best friend. Whereas nowadays I've probably only made a handful of purchases on eBay this year. maybe like 5-6 purchases on eBay this year. I really kind of save it up for the toy fairs. I'm lucky enough to have like a big toy fair every other month for the most
Okay.
part.
Yeah.
Here where we live, we've got other smaller toy fairs. We've got some vintage stores here that I'm lucky enough to have in the area. And then I generally try to do an interstate trip if I can, like maybe once or twice a year, whether it's a road trip to Canberra, which is only 3 hours away, or hopping on a
Yeah.
flight to Melbourne, which has lots of vintage toy stores. So, it's about the thrill of the hunt, and I try to do as much of that in the flesh as I can, as opposed to online. But I also try to be mindful of the fact that when you're collecting, it's easy to put all the emphasis on like what comes next. Like, that's cool, I got that, but what am I getting next? So I try to be
Yeah.
very mindful about appreciating the things that I already have in my collection. And having a YouTube channel helps there, because you can pull stuff off the shelf and you can speak about them and really appreciate them above and beyond just that was a transaction. I've got it. That gave me my little dopamine fix, and now I'm looking out for the next thing. So, and when it comes to like vintage toys, and appreciating what I have, I appreciate them for the nostalgic connection. But I also find myself just being real nerdy about like appreciating the artistry that went into that toy. Like, sure, this was a kid's
Yeah.
toy, but some of the stuff that I collect, particularly the Playmates lines like Ninja Turtles and Toxic Crusaders and Skeleton Warriors, like lines like that, a line that I didn't mention before, but I really love collecting it. Like, they've got pretty hectic like sculpts and paint applications and play features and spring-loaded accessories and all these crazy elements, that so much thought and creativity and ingenuity went into that, even though it was just a kid's toy. So I can kind of really nerd out about just speaking about really appreciating the artistry and creativity of vintage toys, and I try to make that not just about what I'm looking for, but also what I have.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, like there's different ways, and of course the community, like
Yeah.
the collecting community and mixing it with the community definitely is a big part of what gives me the toy collecting buzz as well. So it comes in a few different forms for me, but I've got a lot of passion for it, and
No, it
I'm
shows. It really does show, and I can
I
hear the
love it.
passion when you're talking about it, and it is, yeah, it's endearing. It's so cool, and I echo
Appreciate it.
your statement there when you're saying about you can appreciate the artistry of the vintage figures. Now, in today's standards with the articulation and stuff like that, the vintage
Yeah,
toy line does seem fairly basic. But
for
like I
sure.
said before, you can appreciate it, and there's such a charm to a vintage toy. I mean, like the 5 POA figures for Star Wars, or the
Yeah,
sort of like the basic molds of the Motu figures. You just look at them and you just think, wow, they're just absolutely great. And like I say, there's a charm to them but I can look at the modern day figures and think the articulation's cool, the face sculpts and the photo real awesome stuff. But for me, that nothing can take away that charm from vintage figures, whether it be
yeah.
Star Wars, Motu, Transformers, whatever toy line back in the 80s.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, look, I agree with you 100%. Like, there's a lot of, rationally speaking, in terms of points of articulation and accessories and
Mm,
posability and different sets of hands and head sculpts and stuff. Like the modern stuff, like it's no comparison to the vintage stuff. But yeah, to me, like there is still absolutely a lot of artistry and creativity that went into the vintage stuff. And
yeah. Oh, definitely.
although they were designed to be played with by kids and smashed about and getting lost in the sand pit and all this sort of stuff, I still love to look at toy lines from the 80s and 90s and be like, man, real thought went into this. Like, some of these
Yeah.
dudes that design these sculpts and paint applications, and especially once you get into the 90s and you got a lot of spring-loaded weapons and glow-in-the-dark
Yeah.
features, like a lot of thought went, color changing features with the Kenner Terminator line in the 90s. Like, a lot of thought and creativity and inspiration and imagination went into that. And not to mention,
Absolutely.
Stu, we're talking about an era where it felt like there was always new stuff. Like, think
Yeah.
about all the different cartoons, movies, and fresh ideas that were part of that era. And obviously toys were just one part of it. So yeah, I mean, I certainly got a lot of love for that. And when it comes to collecting, it's not just about like what's my
Mm,
next thing. It's about appreciating what I've
absolutely.
already got. So yeah,
Uh,
it's awesome.
and what you said there is testament to that era, that 40 plus years later, these toy lines are still going strong in a
For
modern
sure.
day form. Because I mean, they could have
For
quite
sure.
easily knocked it on the head and not bothered at all. But for them, like, you know, like the Transformers Motu, Star Wars, G.I. Joe Classifieds, you know, awesome that they're still going strong in 40 plus years later. I think that's
Yeah.
testament to that
And
era.
those are the big ones, but like there's a million like second and third tier ones that
Yeah,
they might have only had like one 9-episode cartoon run, but they spawned a
yeah,
TV line. There was Lunchboxes, there was a Nintendo game, there was, you know
yeah,
what I mean? Like there was just listen, I'm not going to start complaining about like why don't we have fresh IP now, because I love that the stuff that we grew up with is still relevant, but there was
yeah.
something so special about just so much fresh ideas and imagination that was just like it was
Mm.
it was just the 80s and 90s especially were pretty incredible. With that said, I mean, maybe there's cool, like it's been a long time since I've gone and walked through a toy mate, like a major toy store here, or the toy
Yeah,
section of a department store here in Australia. So especially because I don't collect modern stuff, so maybe there is some really inspired stuff going on in toy aisles nowadays, but I'm not too sure. Someone else would have to answer that who shops for the modern stuff. So but yeah, it was a special time.
absolutely. Absolutely, absolutely. I've got one last question for you. What does your collection mean to you, Scott?
Oh, mate, as I'm sure you can probably tell, mate, it means a heap to me. Like physically speaking, my collection room is just like is my happy place. I mean, like a lot of us,
Yeah,
our collection rooms
yeah,
are our happy place. If you've had a rough day, if you're being ground down by the stresses of adulthood, of the real world, which are all
yeah,
too frequent these days, coming in here, it certainly allows me to decompress and puts a smile on my face. And one thing that I've really tried to do with my collection room more recently is make it a functional space. So I've got a TV in here. I've got a video game. I've got a Super Nintendo here. I've got a VHS collection. So I
mm,
don't throw on a movie here on VHS too frequently, but I do play a fair bit of Super Nintendo, and I try to find ways that I can enjoy this room more so than just staring at the shelves. But
yeah,
by playing some games and doing that sort of stuff. But more so than that, I think my collection also allows, like, I'm the kind of person where, like, it's funny. I look at my dad and I literally can't picture my dad as a kid. Like, I can't imagine what my dad was like as a young kid. Whereas I feel like if you meet me, you can probably imagine what I was like as a kid, because my inner child still runs the joint. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sure,
yeah,
like I'm
yeah,
39 years old, but I still feel like I've got the same kind of sense of imagination and enthusiasm as I did when I was a kid. I'm responsible. I pay my bills. I pay my mortgage. I go to work. But I feel like having this collection and having this passion for collecting vintage toys, it helps keep me in touch with the inner child. It's so yeah,
absolutely.
that's a big part of it as well.
That Scott, absolutely awesome, and I've absolutely loved chatting with you. I mean, your enthusiasm is, like I say, endearing. It's certainly infectious, and I just love that. And I speak to a lot of people, and the best part about doing this series is meeting people like yourself and talking to people like that yourselves, and you can feel the enthusiasm, the passion they've got for their collection and the collecting and stuff like that, and what it means to them. And it's just absolutely amazing. And I've loved talking to you. Unfortunately, that has come to the end of the conversation.
Mate, that's
One
fine.
last
It's flown by.
question. It has. It always does. It always does. One last question. Where can people find you on social media?
Yeah, so look, the main places to find me are Scott Crusher on YouTube and Crusher Collects on Instagram. I've got a TikTok as well, just because I wanted to see what the fuss is all about. I can't say I'm particularly active on TikTok, but you can find me Scott Crusher there as well. And yeah, those are the main ones: YouTube Scott Crusher, Instagram Crusher Collects.
Okay, cool. What I'll do then is I shall put your links to your social media platforms in the description below. Scott, it's been, like I said, an absolute pleasure talking to you. I really, really enjoyed chatting to you today, mate. So
It's been
thank
my
you so
pleasure.
much. Um, all I've got left to say is thank you all for watching. Take care, stay safe, and we shall see you in the next video. Take care and bye for now.